Welcome to our special webinar in October of 2023. My name is Max, and I'm going to talk today about the new custom WebResolver step and the new UI inspector in QFTest 7 and how they can be combined to achieve a new process for developing web tests with QFTest. Right here, let me use this chance to plug our next special webinar, which will happen in February 2024. And the title will be Test Smart with Smart ID. So it will be another special webinar about new QFTest 7 features. This time it will be a deep dive into Smart ID and the new label algorithm in QFTest 7. So this will be really interesting, and you can sign up the same way you signed up to this special webinar if you're interested. All right, but now let's get started with this webinar right here, and we are going to talk about custom WebResolvers. Let me share my screen so that you have a visual idea of what I'm going to talk about. Okay, so now what you're seeing here is my desktop with the latest version of QFTest open, and I've prepared a little test suite with our topics for today. So before we dive into the new QFTest 7 features, let's briefly talk about the custom WebResolver itself, what it is and why you need it. So what is a custom WebResolver? The way QFTest works for testing application UIs is it establishes it builds a semantic description of your application UI, and then it operates on that semantic layer. So for example, let me open our demo application that I have here prepared, our car configurator. It's just a small web application for configuring a car. I'm now wondering if I can switch the language here somehow. Sorry, I'm badly prepared. Maybe there is a parameter. Yes, wrong. Beata, do you have any idea how I can switch the language of this? Okay, so for human, it is relatively easy to describe the semantic structure of the application. We can see, okay, a tab bar, we can see a table, but for a program, this is not as easy. So QFTest has a hard time of guessing what div belongs to what kind of semantic component. So what we need to do is, if we have a web application that uses a custom UI framework, we need to teach QFTest about what does a combo box look like, what does a table look like, what does a tab panel look like, because there are no hard rules in HTML for how these things should look. And originally that was done by resolvers called we call them resolvers in QFTest. They are scripts that receive a component and then they return the class of the component, and you can build some custom logic that takes a look at the HTML element and decides what component best fits. But we wanted to make this more user-friendly, and so we developed the custom WebResolver, which is a set of instructions that you can use to tell QFTest what your application should look like semantically. And I've prepared here an example what it would look like if I recorded this mouse click with a matching custom WebResolver for this application. And you can already see here the mouse click looks a little bit different because we now have the vehicle table, and then we can already see QFTest has some semantic idea about the column and the row index of the table. So this is German right now, but of course in English it would be price. And if I take a look at what this component looks like in the recorded component tree, I can see here, down here I have this prepared. The component tree is much simpler, contains much less elements that are not important for the semantic structure, and all of the elements have semantic names. These are the generic classes that I was talking about. We have a tab panel. The tab panel compares some other kind of panel, and in there is the table. And all of the items of the table don't even have to be recorded separately, because I can access them with this add and end symbol syntax. So this is what we are trying to achieve with a custom WebResolver. We want to go from this to this. And this makes our tests much more stable. It will make QFTest much more helpful because it understands the semantics of your application, can offer you different kinds of checks for different components, and many other beneficial things. Okay, so let's take a look at how this is done. Before QFTest 7, there was this procedure call, install CustomWebResolver, and it contains a bunch of different parameters that take some values that are then parsed by QFTest and applied to your application. But as you can already see, this can be really cumbersome to edit because it's just a table with parameters, but these parameters sometimes have many lines, and I have a very small view into a whole bunch of different rules in here. And also the syntax is quite complicated with lots of equal signs and commas and at symbols and stuff. So it's really difficult to use, and there are a few people that really understand how this works. So what we did with QFTest 7 is we overhauled this entire process. We built a separate node just for installing the CustomWebResolver. So installing a CustomWebResolver now is not done through a procedure in our standard library anymore, but through a separate step type. And it is important, or it's important for us to get as many as possible of our customers to this new system. So we made it easy to migrate from the procedure call. So if you have been using QFTest for a couple of years, you will probably have such a procedure call in your test suites. And if you're running QFTest 7, you can get rid of it and update it to the new CustomWebResolver step by doing a right click, selecting transform node into, and selecting install CustomWebResolver. And here you can see the first great new feature of the CustomWebResolver node in QFTest 7. We can see it before we even use the step. It's a validation. So what QFTest 7 now does, it is validates your CustomWebResolver configuration and will inform you about any errors that it finds, like things where the syntax is not correct. Previously, in the CustomWebResolver procedure call, if you had an invalid syntax somewhere, QFTest would just ignore that item and just do nothing with it. This caused a lot of trouble for our customers because you were never really sure if your mapping was incorrect, or you had an error in your mapping, or you were doing the wrong thing. You didn't know what's going on. And now you get an actual validation result where QFTest tells you exactly which items have problems and how you can resolve those problems. So for example, here I have obviously some item with an ancestor, which is some garbled string, which QFTest cannot deal with, but it tells you what would be the valid options. But in this case, my CustomWebResolver was like this all of the time, and this mapping is wrong, but it never worked anyway, so I can just ignore it. I can tell QFTest to just convert all of the errors to comments, and then I should get my new install CustomWebResolver step. And you can see here QFTest automatically transformed the procedure call into a separate step. And in here, I now have this text area with basically it's the same information that was encoded in my procedure call before, but now I have a much nicer interface with a better view at all of the different kinds of mappings that I have here. And I can see at the very end the information about the items that could not be converted because of errors, and they are just commented out down here. But I will talk about the details of this step later. Beforehand, I just want to talk a little bit more about the procedures that we have in QFTest, because as you saw, let's talk about variables first. So one thing that is a little bit tricky that we noticed that many of our customers did is they were using variables in the CustomWebResolver procedure call. So for example, like this, they had generic classes, and generic classes was just the result of this QFTest variable. And they didn't use this feature to make the CustomWebResolver dynamic in some way. They just used the set variable step to make the rules in here easier to edit. This causes some problems when converting this step because the variable value is only known at runtime. But to make it easy for you to migrate to the new step, even if you use such a scheme, we developed a solution where QFTest automatically can parse a run log of a test run where this variable is set correctly at runtime. So all I have to do, for example, here to transform this CustomWebResolver node is to run the sequence once, just press enter to run the sequence. And now I have in the background, I have a run log for this run. And now I can use transform node into install CustomWebResolver. And I get a warning message from QFTest about the variables that are in my configuration. But QFTest already tells me we found a run log which contains a test run where these variables have a value, and you can use this information in the run log to convert the step, or you can choose another run log if you have, if you know that another run log would be a better idea. So let's do this now, and I can see here QFTest replaced my variable with the actual content of the variable and then transformed my step. So this is a really convenient way to migrate to the new CustomWebResolver node. You should try it. If you have an install CustomWebResolver procedure call in your project, you should just try converting it with QFTest 7, because there are only advantages and there are no disadvantages if you are able to convert it with the help of QFTest. As you were probably able to see, this install CustomWebResolver procedure call has a little strike through it. I'm not sure if it goes through the screen sharing very visibly, but this means that the procedure is now deprecated. Because we have introduced something better with QFTest 7, we strongly encourage you to switch to this better thing. The deprecated procedure call will stay in the standard library. It will probably not go away anytime soon because we want to be backwards compatible, but we will not continue to develop this. We will not fix any bugs or introduce new features. New features will be introduced in the new CustomWebResolver node, and if you want to benefit from them, you need to migrate. There are also a bunch of other related procedures that are also deprecated, or that we deprecated with QFTest 7. Two of them have a replacement in the QFS Web CWR package now instead of Ajax. One is dump configuration, which is a replacement for dump CustomWebResolver properties. This is mainly useful for debugging if you want to know the current state of your CustomWebResolver. If you use dump configuration, you will get the same format that is used in the new CustomWebResolver step instead of the old format from the procedure call, which is definitely useful. And if you need to uninstall your CustomWebResolver for any reason, which is something you usually do not need to do, you can use the uninstall procedure in the same package instead of the old one. All right. There's one exception. There's one procedure in the standard library that we did not replace. Let me do a double click and jump into this package here. It's the update CustomWebResolver properties procedure. Some of you might have this in your projects, probably only because someone from our support helped you develop your initial CustomWebResolver. This is not yet deprecated, but it will be in a future version of QFTest. Right now, it still has some functionality that can only be realized with this procedure call, but we are already working on merging this functionality into the CustomWebResolver step, and this will be included in a future version of QFTest. So just to give you a heads up, if you're using this one, you will be able to convert it to a CustomWebResolver install node in the future as well, but not with QFTest 7 yet. Okay, so that's all of the procedure calls, but now let's not talk about the past any longer. Let's talk about the present and the future. So the install CustomWebResolver step. Let me just revert this change here. Okay, so if you create a new install CustomWebResolver step, it will look like this. And also if you create a new project with QFTest 7 and use the quick start wizard, you will also get a CustomWebResolver step from now on by default. And you can already see the most important changes at first glance. So the first feature that will prove very useful is comments. In this document that you have here, you can mark any line you want with a hash symbol, and it will convert that line into a comment, which will be ignored by QFTest. But you can include information about what you are doing in the custom web resolver and why for future you or for your colleagues to make it better understandable what is going on in your configuration. The other thing that I already showed you is the validation. So if you ever, if you ever include some invalid stuff in your custom web resolver, the configuration will be validated either when I reformat it, or if I do some action on it, or if I run the step. So every time I run the step, QFTest will validate the configuration. And if the configuration is not valid, QFTest will stop with an exception. This should help you to make sure that whatever you are doing in your custom web resolver is actually correct and actually does what you think it does. So it stops you from accidentally having invalid stuff in your configuration. So let's get rid of this again. So QFTest is happy with us. We also, another goal that we had with the custom web resolver node is to reduce the complexity of the syntax. Oh, actually, I see the comments are in German right now because I just switched the language. But if I insert a new one of those CWR steps, I actually get the comments in English as well. So this is probably more helpful for you. Like this. Okay. If you take a look, so for the syntax, we try to reduce the number of special characters that you need to use to do some magic syntax stuff. And what we are using is we're using a common standard of YAML. So YAML. The YAML is a text-based syntax language for writing or sharing structured data. It's the same thing as JSON, for example, or XML. It's another one of those languages that you define a document and you can define lists and maps and strings and booleans and numbers and all of this stuff. So if you know about YAML, you know about the custom web resolver already. But also we wanted to make sure that nobody has to learn a new syntax to use the custom web resolver. And that's why we introduced this little quick actions icon in the line number gutter here at the left. So this will follow you around if your cursor moves to another line. And anytime you click this, it will give you relevant context actions for the line that you are currently on. And you can use this to do all kinds of stuff with your configuration. You can get help, but you can also modify the configuration like this. You can add a new entry. And if you have a new entry added, then you get lots of additional options to modify this entry. So you can add additional information, and you can add even more information, and you can add even more information, and even more information. So this can be quite a lot if you're just starting out, but at least you don't have to know everything that you can write in here. You can go in and write stuff manually if you know what you're doing, but you never have to. You can always use this menu to discover things you can do or add at this point, or you can use it to actually do things with the configuration and change things and be safe and know that you don't introduce an error in the syntax because QFTest handles the syntax for you. So we believe we got the best of both worlds in this situation. We have a syntax that is expressive and it's readable. You can understand what's going on here if you know what's going on. And at the same time, you don't have to study the manual or even have the manual open while you're writing your custom web resolver configuration. Okay. Another thing that we introduced that you usually needed to consult the manual for when doing a custom web resolver configuration is the generic classes. So as you can already see here, I've got some rules that define what an HTML element must look like in order for it to receive a certain generic class. So this green, your generic class, is the most important thing here. I need to I need to replace this with the actual generic class that I'm interested in. And normally in the past, I would have to go into the manual and take a look at the list of all the generic classes that are available in QFTest. But with QFTest 7, I don't have to do this anymore. I can use the quick menu and go to change generic class. And in here, I have a drop-down with all of the generic classes that QFTest supports, sorted by category. And I can drill in here and just take the kind of class that I want. I can even discover, there are interesting kinds of classes here. And I can just choose one, and QFTest will automatically fill it in for me. So this is really handy for writing or changing the configuration in a safe way. So the first thing is you don't have to know all of the generic classes, and the second one is you don't have to type it correctly even. QFTest will type it for you. One other very useful feature of the new CustomWebResolver node is that you can not just install CustomWebResolvers, you can also update CustomWebResolvers that are already installed. For this, you can use this little checkbox down here, and you can turn the install CustomWebResolver node into an update CustomWebResolver node. So if I install this one, I can see that there are some errors that I introduced here. Let's get rid of this rule again. And I'm going to install this CustomWebResolver. And I can see in the terminal that the previous CustomWebResolver was uninstalled and then the new one was installed to start fresh. But now I have this update CustomWebResolver here, and if I run this one, my CustomWebResolver this is also invalid. Let me just get rid of this as well. I run this update CustomWebResolver. You can see here in the terminal the existing CustomWebResolver was updated instead of uninstalling it and installing a fresh one. And with this feature, you can split your CustomWebResolver configuration into multiple steps, either to make it more understandable and to have a less long configuration for each individual step. But you can also use this to update a CustomWebResolver that was installed through the procedure call. So for example, if you are for some reason not able to migrate your procedure call into a CustomWebResolver node, you can at least use the CustomWebResolver node to add any mappings in the future that you want to add to your existing resolver. You can make any changes here and use the update functionality to update your existing CustomWebResolver. So you don't have to touch the original one, but if you do anything new, you can use the new technology that we have. So this is definitely useful and good to know. Okay, one other thing. As you may know, with the CustomWebResolver, you can not just define your own rules, you can also extend a set of rules that are already defined by QFTest. So for certain UI frameworks that have many users, we went in and wrote the CustomWebResolvers for you. And the way you would do this is you would say base equals auto detect. So what you're doing is you're using a base resolver that you are working with. So let me get rid of this one. So we have just an easier example. And if I say auto detect, it means that QFTest will look at the application and see if it might be a framework that is supported by QFTest out of the box, and it will tell you if it is. So in our example, I can run this, and QFTest will, as you can see in the terminal, it starts the auto detector. Let's increase the size of the terminal a little bit. It starts the auto detector, and in this case, it actually finds a framework because this application was built with jQuery UI. QFTest will say, hey, jQuery UI, you should probably use our built-in jQuery UI base resolver. And I can easily do this by copying this out of here and pasting this here. And then I get the built-in CustomWebResolver rules that are built in for this framework in my test suite. This is extremely useful if you happen to use a framework that QFTest supports, then you really should use our built-in resolvers. You can always then add your own mappings for any components that are not handled by our built-in resolver. New with QFTest 7 is that you can actually take a look at all of the resolvers that are included with QFTest I can do this by opening the quick action menu on base and clicking new available base resolvers. And this actually opens a new file, which is a new standard library that we introduced in QFTest 7. It's called qfs-resolvers.qft, and it contains all of the custom web resolver stuff. So what you can see here is a list of UI frameworks that we support. And what's new here is that first thing, you can see the entire list easily, but also some of these use our newer technology, and you can actually look under the hood to see how they work. So for example, for Fluent UI is one of our more recent custom web resolvers that we ship for version 8 of Fluent UI React. If you take a look at this procedure, it actually contains another install custom web resolver step. And this one is really big because it contains all of the rules needed for all of Fluent UI React. And so this is quite a lot. But if you're using, for example, Fluent UI React, then this QFTest will automatically reference this and use this custom web resolver, and you can extend it as you want, but you don't even probably need to. It will include everything you need, mostly. And you can look under the hood here and look, hey, how was this done? So even if you have to write your own custom web resolver for your own UI framework, you can still look at the standard library and see, how did they do this mapping? Maybe there is something interesting here that I can use as inspiration for my own custom web resolver. So this is very useful as well. It makes the inner workings of QFTest more transparent and provides you with some examples of how to write a custom web resolver. Okay, so while we're at features, let's talk about more features. I've got a little bit more here. The last feature that I want to talk about is scripts. So as I told you in the beginning, originally before the custom web resolver, you only had a chance to write resolver scripts to define which HTML element should have which generic class. This possibility still exists because there are always situations where you need to do something that this custom web resolver syntax cannot represent. You need some custom logic to explain to QFTest in which situations which generic class should be used. And originally you would have to jump into the manual and look up the interface for the script and then write the script. This we also made much easier with the custom web resolver step. You have the script resolvers menu in here, which includes all of the most important resolver scripts that you might need. For example, a feature resolver. And if I select it, it will automatically create a new script step with a template for this kind of resolver for me. And I just have to write in my own logic for the actual resolver, but all of the boilerplate code is handled for me. And this even works for different kinds of script language. So if I switch the script language, for example, to Groovy because I prefer Groovy, then I can go into the templates menu in here and just select feature resolver again, and it will give me the template for the script language that I prefer. So we highly recommend you use this. Also, you can see if I create a script like this, it will be created inside of the install custom web resolver step, which is just a visual change, but it is really helpful to signal that these things belong together. The scripts only make sense in the context of the custom web resolver. So this is another tool that you can use to organize your suite. Okay, but enough about the custom web resolver for now. I want to talk to you also about the other big puzzle piece that we introduced in QFTest 7, which is the UI inspector. The UI inspector is a separate window that you can open in several different ways. One is you can use the clients menu up here and select the client that you want to inspect and click Open Inspector. But if you're working with the custom web resolver anyway, you can also use the inspector button in the toolbar to quickly open the inspector. So I'm going to do this right now. And here you get a tree representation of your application. I did something not so smart. I recursively opened every element. So let's give it a minute. this is relatively, the idea behind the UI inspector is similar to the dev tools in the browser, but it's more specialized for the use with QF-tests. So there is lots of information that is not included in here that would be included in the UI in the dev tools of the browser. But on the other hand, there are some information that you only would get from QF-test that are not included in the dev tools. So especially for writing a custom web resolver configuration, this UI inspector is very useful, as I will show you right now. You can use this UI inspector to analyze the components of your application. So for example, I click on this inspect mode, and then I can click on any kind of element in my application, and the UI inspector will jump to that element and highlight it. And then I can increase the size of this component information panel down here. And I can see here, this is all of the information that the UI inspector can provide me about this component. So it knows about the generic class, but it also knows about the HTML tag name, the text content, the HTML attributes, and some more QF-test specific information, which is basically the same that you would get if you were to record this component as a QF-test component. But of course, doing it through the UI inspector is way faster, and you can quickly check something without having to commit to recording a component. Let's see. So this UI inspector, together with the new custom web resolver step, enables a completely new workflow for building your configuration. And I want to give you a short demo right now what this looks like in practice. So in our example, we had the situation that we wanted to map this table properly so that we get rid of all of these div elements. So for that situation, the first thing we would do is we would launch our application, open our inspector, and then we inspect the component that we are interested in. So in this case, it's this table cell down here. I can click it to verify with the highlight that it's the element I'm interested in. And then I'm going to look at the information that the UI inspector gives me about the HTML. And this is under engine-specific information. And here I can see all of the attributes. And now I am looking for some attribute that gives me information about the semantic role of this HTML node, because I want to map it to some generic class from QF-test. And the best thing that I can find here in this demo application is this data cell attribute, which sounds promising because it represents the element represents a cell in a data table. So let me copy this attribute, this data cell class, because I want to use it in my custom web resolver. I'm going to switch over to QF-test. And then here in the generic classes category, the generic classes category is used. Let me switch to an English version for your convenience. Sorry. Fresh. So the generic classes, they are used to map HTML elements to generic classes. So what I would do is I would click the quick button in here and say new entry for generic classes. Then I've got my entry here. And then the next thing is I want to change this generic class to a generic class that matches this element. But I'm now tired of clicking around all of the time. I want to have a quicker way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control Space. So like if I were in a script node and wanted to access the autocomplete, I press Control Space, and Control Space also opens this menu right at my cursor. And then I can even use the keyboard to quickly select an element. So in my case, I'm going to change the generic class in here into something for a table. So let's go into the table section and select table cell. Let's see, there are many table cells. There are some other classes that I don't care about. I'm going to choose table cell. Okay, so now I've got table cell in here, but now I need to think about the right side of my definition. So let's open the quick menu again and see what I have here. I can see I can add a CSS class. Okay, so this is exactly what I want because I copied a CSS class to my clipboard. And I can see here, QF-test generated me some placeholder, but I'm going to replace this with data cell from the UI inspector. And then I've also got some tag here, which is a default but I don't care about the tag, and I know it's also not a div, so I'm just going to remove the HTML tag rule here. And QFTest automatically reformats this for me. And now I can press OK. And now I need to verify that what I did actually does the thing that I wanted to do. And to do this, I'm just going to run my install node to install the CustomWebResolver. And then I'm going back to the UI inspector and just click on refresh, reload hierarchy. And this makes QFTest rescan our application, and we can already see the element that we had selected instantly converts into a table cell, and the generic class is visible right there. And also I can see all of the other table cells that were affected by my change. So I can instantly see that, yeah, I can verify all of these are also data cells, so it makes sense that they also get the same generic class. And like this, I can go through my application piece by piece and map all of my components the right way. So for example, now I would go to the next element one piece up, which is our TR element, which is some kind of table row, as I can see by the highlight. But we need to teach QFTest about this. Again, there is a class data row in here. So we should use this to map this to a data row. And second time around, I'm going to be much quicker because I get experience with this. I'm going to change the generic class to table row, add a CSS class, paste it in. And I'm getting a little more confident, so I'm going to remove the tag manually. And this now looks a little bit weird because I have one time this 2-line variant and one time I have this 1-line variant. I can let QFTest clean this up for me by clicking reformat. And QFTest will always reformat my configuration to the most compact version it can. So let's install this CustomWebResolver again, go back to the UI inspector and refresh. And I can see now my table row is also correctly recognized by QFTest. And then I'm going to finally do the same thing for the table. Again, here I can use this data table class, but to make it more interesting, let's map the actual table HTML tag this time to table. And if I'm even more confident now, I can write this myself. I don't have to use the quick action menu. I can just say table. And I can always press reformat if I'm not sure if I did anything wrong. In this case, reformat does not give me an error, which looks good. I can install this CustomWebResolver, go back to the UI inspector, refresh, and I can see here the table is now a camel case table, which means it has the correct generic class. I can use the UI inspector not just to create a mapping, but also to verify a mapping and to verify what's going on in my application. So for example, if I have some kind of element that has a generic class, but I have no idea why, or I don't see how this happens, I can go into the engine-specific information and see the mapping. And the mapping contains information about how this mapping came to be. So why does this element have the generic class table? And it gives me the actual name of the rule that created this mapping. So I have it, I can see, okay, this is, oh, sorry, I resized the window. I can go in here and see, okay, the HTML tag table was mapped to table, and then I can see in my CustomWebResolver configuration where this happened. This is useful because sometimes you have some side effects. You add a new item to your configuration and it maps something, but it also maps something completely different that you didn't intend, and you can figure out what causes what with the UI inspector information. Okay, so there are lots of other things that you can do with the CustomWebResolver. There are lots of additional other kinds of categories that you can use in your configuration to tell QFTest about what you want to have happen with your components. There's a huge list here. These are all the same ones that were available in the procedure call, but now you have them all listed out in this menu, and you can simply insert one by clicking it, and QFTest will add it to your configuration automatically. And to make your life a little bit easier, it will also include, for the most common ones, it will include a short comment that explains what it's good for, and some default example content so that you can get up and running and you can explore what you can do with the custom web resolver. In the end, all of the information about everything the custom web resolver does is in the manual. But again, we try to make it as easy as possible to get started with the custom web resolver without having to go into the manual all of the time by adding useful information all around the UI. Okay, so I think we are already running out of time for the first part of our special webinar. So I'd say let's leave it at that for now. I hope this was helpful for you. I hope this gives you good ideas about how you could work with a custom web resolver in your own project. And it gave you some idea how you can get started without being afraid of messing stuff up. Yeah, so let's switch to the second part of the special webinar, the Q&A session. For this, we are going to stop the recording. I'm going to use the chance to thank all of the online listeners that have watched the special webinar asynchronously. If you have any feedback, you can get in touch with us at our support email address. And you can also get in touch if you have a situation with your custom web resolver that you can't resolve on your own. We are very aware that this is a really complicated subject with many pitfalls and many application-specific things that you need to take into account that you might not figure out on your own. So we encourage you to take advantage of our free customer support. We are happy to assist you with your specific custom web resolver woes. Okay, so thanks everyone, and see you to our next special webinar, I guess.